Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Hi everyone. I hope the nor'easter missed our East Coast viewers. The groundhog has been pretty accurate for 3 weeks. I think so many people are ready for spring. I was trying to figure out, what time zone Polska was in, and we Oleg and I figured it out. He's here. We can do math on Nightlight, and then spoken to Tyrone one time and get kids singing "Happy Birthday" at the drive-through. So you never know what you're going to get with these two. But we're going to have a really fun show this afternoon. Probably a couple months ago, it was, which is when Oleg and Tyrone, contacted me and said, "Oh, hey, we still have, our continued interest in Atlantis. Got some, new theories and end of the ice age, materials." And I was like, "Oh, okay, let's definitely do that." And the Nightlight viewers really enjoy that topic anyway. So we have Alexander Czeszkiewicz, author of Deja Vu, Has Everything Already Been? And there he is. And Tyrone Ellington is the author of Journey Through the Origins of History. Alex's website is czeszkiewiczglobal.com, and Tyrone's website is rebirthoftheword.com. Okay, how are you two doing today?
Great, thanks for having me on. Long time no see.
Yeah,
I'm doing well. Thank
good.
you. And I gotta say, Alexander's book is one amazing book. I gotta say that one amazing book.
I need to finish yours finally. All the work has been done, so but I have both here.
But both of your books are terrific. Since we have been talking a little bit of, we are going to get into the evidence, talking a little bit about that prior to the show as well. But Oleg, how did you get so interested in Atlantis, since you're not really interested, or you don't live like where the main places of interest are, like the Bimini Road. You do say, well, a lot of people just think that Atlantis is a fairy tale. How did you get so interested in Atlantis?
I got interested in Atlantis when I would say I maxed out all the possibility within the mainstream narrative, because I was learning very hard, all the history, including prehistory from the hominids, how it all started. I attempted competitions during my middle high school, and when I finally learned the big picture of history, how it is shown by the mainstream, I started asking questions. How do we know Sumer was the first civilization? How do we know, if the civilization isn't older? How do we know it all, was just like it's shown in my textbooks? And I started, digging deeper and deeper, and I thought to myself that right now we live in the 21st century, but maybe our ancient ancestors lived closer to the ancient times. Maybe they knew something more if they lived 2000 years ago, and in some cases even more than that. So I dug into what ancient historians were telling about our history, what ancient texts from ancient Sumer, Egypt, and plenty of more. And I think that Atlantis, Plato's Timaeus and Critias, I also got it for our conversations here. Timaeus and Critias of Plato, is the basic when it comes to the lost history, with other big things like the Sumerian kings, the pyramids, I think is, the main one when it comes to the mysteries of our past. So that's how I got into this topic.
Okay, and Tyrone, since you're going to be providing other contemporary information, Göbekli Tepe, uh, you, you know, some of your interest was formed by actually seeing a lot of artifacts being taken out of the museums. What else got got you interested in such deep antiquity?
Well, I just wanted to know the origins of humanity, basically. I just wanted to know what was humanity's history. And I wanted to know what was the first representation of some such as a clock, writing systems and technology, for instance. And I became interested in Atlantis because that has always been a part of everything that when I grew up. Every cartoon that I watched somehow included that in some way. Movies included it some way. Shows. I'm actually going back and watching Stargate right now, Stargate 1, SG1, and you get a lot of this historical stuff surrounded by our entertainment. They, of course, it's science. They mix science fiction with facts to entertain us, but it's the stuff that's mentioned within that makes me curious. So I went ahead and I did my due diligence. I've talked to individuals like David Stig, who's been to the Rich Act structure. I've talked to Michael Donnellan, who's in Cadiz, who actually talks about his ideas. And I get both aspects and ideas from both of them, where I can go do my due diligence. I've read Plato's books. I took the Greek versions and put it in ChatGPT to see how it would translate into English, because every language will translate it in their own meanings based off of what the Greeks wrote. Right. So we have to understand that with different languages, there's going to be different comprehensions and understandings that come with it. So I just wanted to find a basic middle ground for all of that.
Okay, cool. And Oleg, you've been on the lecture circuit talking about Atlantis in more detail. You're already pretty detailed in your book. What are some new theories out there? You do go into a lot of the flood story. Both of you cover humanity's writings of floods. The end of the ice age figures into what both of you are writing. So, what is some of the latest Atlantis theories?
Latest Atlantis theories. I think when it comes to the academic world, it's still, taking the roots of both civilization and humanity back by thousands or even tens of thousands of years. The same way, think that right now we know that ancient Sumer was the first, but right now even the idea of ancient Sumer is changing, that it was much older than that. We are even finding from these famous mythical Sumerian kings list, we find more evidence that some of these kings were real and not just mythical figures. And when it comes to ancient Sumer, maybe still it's idea that in the 4th millennium BC, about 3600 BC, it all started, but right now we know that at least 8,000 or even 2,000 years before that, there was something like civilization on the area of ancient Sumer, but we just don't have evidence that they used scripts, so we cannot point that this is civilization and stuff like that. The same, we're uncovering more and more pre-civilizations, human cultures, from 6,000, 7,000 BC, and the same with the origins of humanity. If right now we are pushing back by hundreds of thousands of years the origins of humanity, I think Atlantis becomes plausible to be real. The same that, in the 70s and 80s, it was, basic argument against Atlantis that we didn't have almost any evidence for people during the times of Atlantis 9,600 years BC, using megalithic buildings or building something that looks like civilization. But right now, it's common knowledge. Göbekli Tepe at the end of the 90s was found, and we see that, okay, people during these similar times to the idea of Atlantis built megalithic stuff, and we find more and more evidence that origins of humanity is older, so Atlantis is becoming more and more mainstream just as an idea that something like Atlantean civilization was much older. And what Tyrone talked about, Michael Donnellan, who thinks that Atlantis was near Cadiz, or David Stick Hansen, who visited Rush's structure, I think that it isn't that idea of one of these people is correct and the other not, because if we take a look about what Plato is telling us about Atlantis, he says that it was maritime culture that had its influences over the Mediterranean, that Egypt was its colony. So I think, just as Tyrone is saying, that people should read more of these sources to understand what they are talking about, because with this idea we see that Atlantis was much more than just this famous capital city with concentric rings.
Yeah. Okay, so both of you do have in your books descriptions of inhabitants of these advanced cultures. We're going back, like you just said, going back to 9600 BC. That's in your book. That number is based on 9,000 years prior to Solon's
Yes.
Writing about Atlantis. So, that puts us at the end of the, as the Ice Age is coming to an end. Tyrone, you're covering all kinds of Sumerian information, advanced technology at a early state of building of cities and things like that. So, Tyrone, what are some of the achievements from these people from long ago?
That's a good question because a lot of people consider civilizations. There's different criteria for civilization. I always ask, what is somebody's understanding of what's a civilization? What criteria do they use to be considered a civilization? Some people will say building megalithic structures. Some people will say writing systems. Some people even say that in some cases that the healing of a femur bone from Margaret Mead, who said that. She believes that the beginning of civilization started because she noticed a femur being healed and somebody had to take care of that individual, bring them food, water, and so on and so forth. And she says that happened maybe anywhere from, maybe up to 15,000 years ago. The achievements all depends on the location that you're at. I believe that trade and communication is why we are able to have what we have today, because we are able to communicate with each other on how to better our living conditions. Prime example is agriculture. There are people in 2026 that still live off the land today. They still go hunting every day. They live in log cabins. They have no electricity, no cell phones, no technology of any sort. They just live out there in the woods or in some kind of open land or whatever. So even in 2026, thousands of years ago, we still have people living in what we would consider primitive days. You know what I'm saying? And it's just interesting because in one location we can build. There's one location where you might use a spear to kill an animal. And then when you get to another location, because you're hunter and gathering, you find a group of people who are using bow and arrows. And then you have a group of people that says, hey, we're going to make a crossbow. You make a crossbow with wood and then, with rope, and you pull it tension back and you got an arrow, and there you go, crossbow. So a crossbow is more advanced technology than what a bow and arrow is. And we know it's more advanced technology than what a spear is. And we know that we can go into the weapons of mass destruction and, so on and so forth, and with guns and, all that other stuff. But it all just, it depends on where you at and what is needed at that location. Not everybody needs to have a horse to go from point A to point B. Some people can just walk because it's very, they're close enough to everything that they need. And then you have people who they have a certain type of animal that can run or evade their hunting. And so you might need somebody that can, use a crossbow or a bow. That's much easier. With a spear, you can only throw a spear but so far. But with the bow and arrow, you can add extra feet. So that's where the advanced technology comes from. When it comes to Atlantis, I always asked, even Michael Donnellan, I asked David Stig, and I asked many of other people, what made Atlantis so advanced that they're considered an advanced civilization? I get different ideas from different people, and I just feel like it's just based on the location that you're at.
Okay. So, Oleg, you do go into some of the details about the location of Atlantis. You got the concentric rings that you just mentioned a few minutes ago. Okay, that takes a lot of engineering to pull that off, and it was there for a long time until a natural disaster submerged it, unless it flew off. But then that could be a unrelated theme. But what that engineering of legacy does survive in other cultures, but what was it about being able to make the concentric rings work, and other cultures would imitate that engineering feat? So you get into a little bit of that in Deja Vu.
Yes, I think it's one of the best evidence for cross-cultural reference when it comes to Atlantis, because plenty of people, can be deniers, be debunkers, and say, for instance, Atlantis and the Aztec idea of Aztlan, similar naming, but they say, okay, the description is a little bit different, and so forth. It's just a coincidence. But I think that what you've said, that people's recreation of Atlantis is one of the best evidence that this idea of Atlantis survived in memory of people in more places than just maybe Egypt and Greece, but also in the New World. Because when it comes to the Aztecs, they mention in their text that Aztlan isn't looking exactly like Atlantis. But what is interesting is that they modeled their city of Tenochtitlan, a later capital still in use during the conquistadors' time, and they said that Tenochtitlan was modeled after this lost land of Aztlan. And Tenochtitlan, in my opinion, looked very, very similar to Atlantis. It was on a Lake Texcoco in Mexico. It was part of natural island and part of plenty of added by and connected by bridges artificial islands. And in the middle of the main island there was Templo Mayor, so the Grand Temple. And we know very well how Mesoamerican pyramids look like, that they aren't with a straight top like the Giza pyramids or other Egyptian pyramids, but they are looking very often even not like a pyramid but like an artificial mound when it comes, for instance, to previous Mayan pyramids, and on the top there is something that looks like a temple or a chapel. So this is how the pyramids look like. And I think that it's all about Atlantis, because when it comes to Plato's description of Atlantis, it isn't just, concentric circles, city and stuff like that, but also in the middle there is this famous view that there was a hill, and on this hill there was the temple of Poseidon. And I think that this idea of Mesoamerican pyramid and of Tenochtitlan altogether as being modeled after this lost land of Aztlan shows us that they modeled it after Atlantis, that Aztlan was the Plato's version of Atlantis, because even this Templo Mayor, this Grand Pyramid, in my opinion, looked like this primeval, later also Egyptian connection, primeval mount of the Egyptians. I also think there is connection with Atlantis because it's interpreted both as this metaphysical idea that in, metaphysics, when there was nothing, there was this first primeval mound that happened to be from non-existence, but also on the physical idea that this primeval mound was the first place of the gods. So I think that yes, Tenochtitlan, if it was located on water, and if it was connection of natural and artificial islands connected by bridges with this Templo Mayor at the middle, which looked like this recreation of the primeval hill, primeval mound of Atlantis, and on it the Temple of Poseidon, I think it's a huge smoking gun when it comes to other sources about Atlantis, and that its memory was beyond just Greece and Egypt.
Yeah, I think it's just a fascinating topic where maybe we don't have any surviving examples of writing from about 10,000 BC, but when you look at the artwork, some the oral traditions, the folklore that have survived for thousands of years, you get that in some of the native cultures that is going back 5,000 years. Is that or is the artwork enough proof that there was something there? But what, probably like the 600 BC when Solon first wrote things down. Is that like the first appearance in in literature, and okay, and it's maybe one of the more famous examples, but it's setting a pattern for later cultures to keep acknowledging something that was there. And Tyrone, you're do cover a lot of that, uh, the Sumerian artwork in your book.
Yeah, it's so interesting because writing system, there's a progression to writing systems. It started off as drawings. I spoke to you guys about this before. Emojis is considered a writing system. As long as two people understand the emojis that's being used, they can have a conversation without anybody knowing what they're saying. They might have an idea because, a praying hands could be the same thing as clapping. You just have to understand the context of which is being used in.
Good point.
So I always say this, that when it comes to writing system, there's a progression to it. That's why we have experts called linguistics that study this in particular, right? It could be etched, it can be cuneiform, it could be a slash, it could be all kinds of things, right? And we know that with drawings, we find drawings from all around the world, right? And that can be a simple writing system. A writing system doesn't have to be as sophisticated as today. The reason why it's sophisticated as it is today is because of the progression from those thousands of years. People used, when they seen a cow, hey, that might be used for agricultural needs of some sort, whether it could be for plowing or for not necessarily plowing, but, for a bull or an ox could be used for plowing, and the cow could be used for, the mating and all this other stuff, fertility, so on and so forth, food and everything else. So when it comes to these writing systems, we have to look at it at its basic level. How do we communicate without using words? Well, first, we start off with sign language. That's literally the first way we communicate it, moving our hands to tell people where we want to go. And then when we get to where we're going, we put a little marker on there. It's no different than tying a ribbon around a tree to make sure that's the location of our spot that we was, just sitting there when we, marching through the woods for, navigating for hunters and gatherers. And then it went from, okay, now we got to explain what we are at today. One thing that I've learned is when it comes to writing systems, it's not a simple, hey, this is a writing system. It's type of a writing system that evolved over time to where we have today. That's why old languages, even Latin of today, they consider Latin a dead language, but people still write in that language and talk in that language. But there are people who would consider it a dead language. Matter of fact, we can consider the Sumerian still a written language today because people are still trying to learn the Sumerian language. And some people even still write in that type of language, right? And it's not just the Sumerian language that started at 3200 BC. I always tell people, the one thing that I learned from Dr. Nili Samit from Bar-Ilan University when I took that class from her, she said the pictographic script started off at 3200 BC, but we have pictographic script that predates that time frame. We got, caves in France that they have where they have drawings of animals. We have, all kinds of, petroglyphs that's around the world. That's a type of writing system that tells a story. And the only people that understand it are the people that wrote it at that time frame and the people that were involved with that type of writing system. So it's not going to be able to be 100% translated. And we have to understand when it comes to these writing systems that it's going to be, a pick and choose. What do you consider a writing system? And that only depends on whether you understand it or not.
Okay. And Tyrone, you do have a lengthy section on the worldwide flood that is covered in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Well, 1,000 years later, the same story is picked up in the for the Old Testament. So it's just give me an example of how one culture may have started a theme that was developed by later ones. Did the Sumerian authors, were they aware of, like the Sphinx was submerged? How was that all part, the worldwide flood story as well? So, I think you make some very valid points.
Yeah, for me, the flood story is very simply easy to be explained. I said this so many times. Humans need water to survive. They need it for survival and agricultural needs. And every human civilization started by a body of water. Whether you lived there for 100 years or 1,000 years, eventually, sometime that body of water will flood, and it would create people to move from that location, whether mostly by boat, because they didn't have cars back then. So if when a fisherman needed a fish, there was plenty of boats out there, canoes and all kinds of stuff, kayaks and everything else, right? So people, when the flood happened, what do most people do? Even in 2026, when the flood happens, most people will grab everything that's important to them, especially animals. If they're raising animals for agricultural needs, they will take those specific animals with them to go ahead and move to a new location. So when these floods happen, it wasn't just, I know a lot of people say it was a worldwide flood, and it possibly could be. We won't have a definite answer on that. But what I can say is that eventually that body of water that you live by, because I live by a big old body of water right near my backyard. Eventually that body of water will flood, and it will flood this whole area. Does that mean that it flooded the whole world? Not necessarily, but I know in this location it flooded. So it's very easy to understand that when it comes to floods, even in 2026 floods, people will move and go about in different ways. And most of the time, those floods started from the mountains, when the ice caps and the water flooded. I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan. I've been in what they consider what's a bowl. And it's basically you surrounded by mountains, and you have a piece of land that's underneath it. And when it would literally start melting, you would see the water rushing down the mountains, and you could see it with your own eyes, how they perceive these things. And this is the same location where we get the actual stories from with the Mesopotamians, the biblical Abrahamic faith ideas.
Cool. And it's okay. So all these observations have been documented for thousands of years in written form. And Oleg, you've been talking a lot about, and even mentioned it at the start of the show, about the King's List. Yeah, that's a very interesting information. The Bible does touch on extreme old age. Like Methuselah being 900 years old or something like. Okay, that's not common today. But what is your research into the King's List revealing about the deep antiquity of Atlantis, more about the people, the hierarchy of Atlantis?
I will first connect the Sumerian Kings list with the previous topic, the flood, because actually the Genesis and lots of stuff from the Old Testament, it's been proven many times by different scholars from different kind of branches of science that the Old Testament, and especially Genesis, it's copied from the older sources, and the same motive that before the flood people lived for hundreds of years, and then God said, okay, only 120 after the times of flood. The same idea, but in a little bit different words, can be found both in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Etrahasis, and the, to some extent, Sumerian Kings List. And Sumerian Kings List, for people who want to know about it, is, as it's said, a list of different kings, of different dynasties of kings from ancient Mesopotamia, and it spans by hundreds of thousands of years. But still, it's very interesting that we are taking the roots of anatomically modern humans back time and time again, so I think that even even right now scientifically we can say that we cannot disprove that it's 100% mythical. And as I've said, I've been working extensively on the ancient Mesopotamia and especially the myths and legends, and what I found out is that we find more and more people mentioned in these kings lists, which of course are considered mythical, just legendary fairy tale stuff, to be actually real. But when it comes to the Sumerian kings list and the flood and the previous sources, it's even more than 1,000 years before between Mesopotamian sources and the biblical one, because the parts of the story in the Bible in Genesis when it's mentioned are dated when it comes to language, when it comes to philology, from about 600 BC to even 300, 200 BC, so very, very late antiquity. And for instance, Epic of Atrahasis, 1800 BC, Gilgamesh even before that. And what's also interesting about what we've said, that language came later, and before that these stories were passed down orally between generations. We know that very well in Gilgamesh, that about 300 years before the oldest fragment of Gilgamesh we found, we have depictions of events from Gilgamesh, so we know very well that Gilgamesh was an older story. And when it comes to the flood, even the details, like when, you know, in this Noah story of Ark, there was a mention that Noah sent one bird to look if the flood is over or not, and you know, the first bird went and came back, which meant to Noah that this bird didn't find any safe place to land on. So he waited a bit and then sent another bird, and another bird didn't come back, which meant to Noah that he found some safe place, so the waters are at least a bit lower, and the flood is coming to an end. And the same stuff is found in the Gilgamesh, but I think he sends 3 birds, not 2, but again, he sends one, he's coming back, the other and final bird is not coming back, which means that the flood is over. And the same mentioned that, for instance, people before the flood lived much longer and got capped to 120 years in the Bible. Longevity of people after the flood, the same can be found in Mesopotamian sources, that, okay, this flood story hero for being heroic is given unlimited lifespan, immortality, he can be still killed, but when it comes to, you know, longevity and aging, he is becoming immortal. But other people after him will be mortal and their lifespan will be much shorter. And the same with the Sumerian kings, as we see that people from, you know, the times before even lived there for tens of thousands of years, not just 900 something years like in the Bible, but tens of thousands of years. And later people's lifespan is being shortened, and then they finally live casual lifespans that we experience nowadays. So it's all the same story, it's similar, you know, the same motives talked, you know, to a bit different words, but the same idea has already been in ancient Mesopotamia. And what is interesting is, I think, when it comes to Epic of Atrahasis, which is heavily speaking on the flood story, I think it's a little bit going into conspiracy theories that humans are very annoying to the gods, to the elites, and that's why they finally, after plenty of different famines, plenty of different epidemics, they say, okay, let's get this huge flood and destroy of the humanity. And of course the Atrahasis survives the flood. And it's interesting that maybe the lifespan was limited because, again, gods didn't want humanity, they wanted to get rid of it. So we even go a little bit into conspiracy theories in that. But when it comes to Atlantis, there is unfortunately not much mentioned in the Sumerian kings list. I know my friend historian Michael Lafland found an allusion to Atlantis in the Egyptian kings list. I don't remember which one exactly, but in Egypt there are also similar lists of kings, but not spanning hundreds of thousands of years, but only tens of thousands of years, about approximately 36,000 BC, 39,000 BC, stuff like that. So unfortunately there isn't like a direct connection, but we can say that the flood, if it was global, I agree with Tyrone that floods are all the time. Even I think in the last 2 years or something, we had a huge flood here in Poland which destroyed a lot of parts of civilization, parts of cities, and it was, you know, extremely unnatural for me looking at picture just a few days before it and a few days after it to see that there is no, when you first look at the picture, there is almost no evidence of advanced society. You know, you see, okay, natural things. So floods are all floods are everywhere, and when it comes to Mesopotamia especially, from which most of the flood stories come, we know from Mesopotamia that year in, year out there was a flood, year in, year out, and people were crazy about it. But of course, it doesn't exclude the possibility that there was once a global flood, and I think, and I show other flood stories that may point that this main idea of this global deluge, not just local, but this global deluge had its roots in the end of the last ice age. And even if we do not consider any theories about Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and others, we know very well, and it's accepted by the academia, that at the end of the last ice age, glaciers were melting, water level was rising, and from the times of the last ice age, about the times of Plato up until the ancient times, we know that there was a rise in sea levels of about 120 meters. So I think it's more than 300 feet or something, which is huge. Like, imagine standing on a beach and a skyscraper of water of sea level rise. So I think very well, even if there was no cataclysm, let's say for a moment, that it could have been remembered as a great flood, because it was a global stuff that, all over the world, the areas were being flooded.
Yeah, that I've been reading a little bit about that as well, and you get all like the 2-mile high ice sheet, you know, about 50 miles north of me. It starts melting, and all across Ohio, you get all this water going, draining into the rivers, and eventually, they're the tributaries to the Ohio River, and then they go in the Mississippi River, and you know, enter into the oceans. And so you have all this cold water suddenly making it into the existing oceans, but it starts filling up the ocean, submerging the land, but it's colder water, so that's why you start getting the the Younger Dryas cold spell, and it's actually really interesting. But there we are back to we have evidence that there is it's a global flood if you your little village is near the then shoreline, and you're tasked, the king tells you, hey, write this book on our culture. And I was like, well, man, there was a huge flood. And it's really, I think both of you point out some really fascinating uh, uh, topics like that, and with the list of kings, it's going back prior to the end of the ice sheet, and so there would be some um, living kings as this uh, the global flood is going on, and so that list is documented, but um, with say the start of the book of Matthew, that has all the Jesus is related to this guy, and all the begatting, and then King David is in there. Okay, so we know Jesus's heritage as well. Um, you know, Tyrone, you have in your book, different places where you're talking about going to church and we'll get to the haplogroups in a little bit, but you're covering uh, so some of your heritage. Uh, I think both of you bring up these really fascinating points about the importance of y- needing to know where we all come from, who's uh, our ancestor. Were they on the Mayflower? Um, it it plays a role in our lives. What you know, Tyrone? What did you learn about those autobiographical sessions or sections in your book?
Well, I got to start off. I'm mixed with a lot of stuff. I was just telling Alexander the other day that I have Polish in me, right? So, the reason why I put my background in my book was because I wanted to show people I have no dog in this fight. I told you this before, Mark. My father's African American, which I found out some of my African heritage, goes back to Africa and Nigeria in certain parts. My mom is German and Turkish and some other things. I don't know what else she's mixed with, but I have a lot of different things in me. I just recently found out that I have Native American in me, which sometimes they consider it Mexican DNA. But it's so interesting because I don't have a dog in this fight. When I went home every day after school, I seen a black person and I seen a white person. I loved them both equally. So I couldn't pick one over the other. So being black and being white wasn't a choice. It was brought upon me. When people looked at my skin, they would say he was black. Of course, my hair looks different now, but when I was younger, I had short hair and I used to wear fitted hats. So I used to wear basketball hats tilted to the side, earrings and other things. So people would say, yeah, he's black, right? And so I never had a dog in this fight about who came first. My curiosity was that how can I learn about the black skin and the white skin? So I actually did a podcast discussion with Dr. Keith Cheng, who's from Penn State University, who is actually the founder of SLC 2485. So he's the one that taught me from his research and everything, where the black skin started and the white skin started and so on and so forth. So I got better understanding because I wanted to know about my background, the origins of everything. Everybody says that, black people started because of the equator and so on and so forth. And then slowly we transitioned to what we have as the Caucasian skin. But I never wanted people to feel like I was picking one over the other. All I wanted to share was what I learned through my book. And my journey, that's why it's called Journey Through the Origins of History, is because it's my journey. It's not anybody else's, right? It's not your journey or Alex's journey or Barbara's journey. It's my journey, what I've learned from picking up books, because no one in this room right now or anybody that's listening right now can read every single book, peer-reviewed article, DNA analysis, and everything in this world. We have to take our bits and pieces and we have to communicate. That's why when I built my website, one of the first things I said is, if we take the puzzle pieces that we all have, there's no telling what kind of picture that we'll see when we work together and put them together. So I wanted to just share what I've learned and hopefully learn from others. Yes, sometimes that I take things very personal because people will perceive that I'm trying to say one thing. I've been called Afrocentric so many times, but what I've learned is, just from my side of the history on the African American side, was that it was at a time that black people didn't have the right to read here in America, right? They had no choice. They would get hung, lynched, and killed for just picking up a simple book, right? And then eventually when they were able to read these books, they spread that message to other people. And this information came from Europeans, right? So instead of calling me an Afrocentric, just call me, hey, somebody who's knowledgeable, because I'm learning from everybody. And I try to understand what everybody's perspective is, because like I said, I have no dog in this fight. So when it came to haplogroups, I wanted to understand what the oldest haplogroup was. And, there's different ideas and theories. I mean, everybody talk about certain haplogroups, but when we talk about Homo sapiens, I know that the oldest Homo sapiens bones that we found so far comes from Morocco, Africa, which dates back 300,000 years ago. And then we have also another set of Homo sapien bones that are in Ethiopia that goes back 200 plus thousand years ago. So the idea of, humans starting in Africa is also a big thing because of the simple fact that that's where they consider humans. But then my question is, what do we consider humans? Many scientists would consider that bipedalism was the beginning of humanity's sake, becoming humans, walking on two legs and so on and so forth. So we go back to the Australopithecus afarensis and Australopithecus ramidus, and that's fine. But then what about the consciousness? Because some people will say it's the consciousness that works. When I was growing up, they always talked about the opposable thumb, using our thumbs and stuff like that. So we have different ideas of what a human is. So I try to understand what everybody's aspect and idea is of a human, and I try to use that in relation to the haplogroups, the DNA, the bone structure, and so on and so forth. But then when our terms get mixed up, because a lot of people will combine a lot of terms into one. Like, I give you an example. When you hear the word Black people, it's mostly African people, African Americans in the United States. But there are people literally like me in Iraq and Afghanistan. I sat and fought side by side with some of the Kurdish army there, and their body was just like me, the same skin tone and everything. And what's really interesting is because my mother's Turkish and I have Turkish in me, people from Turkey here in Georgia, or in America at least, they would say, "Hey, you're Turkish. I can tell because of your nose." But we know that, a lot of people will relate the size of the nose to Africans. But I was told that I never was told that I was African from that aspect. It was just because of my brown skin and my father being African American. But Turkish people literally told me that they could tell I was Turkish because of my nose. So I had to use everything that I had available to me: the science, the personal growing up of being around people and what they seen and showed about me. Like I said, my hair is not the typical of an African American, but what's the typical hair of an African American? Because when you go to Ethiopia, you will see people who have long straight hair, or some people with long straight hair. So how do you distinguish the difference between people? So it's just me finding the haplogroups and understanding. And it's a very broad way of understanding it, because you have to be cautious of what you picking and choosing on where you think people came from. And because we're so mixed up in today's world, I have Neanderthal in me. I have 3% Neanderthal in me because of my mother. And what part of my body features show that? Well, sometimes some people would say they get really hairy because they show that Neanderthals are supposed to be hairy, big, broady, and all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. I can tell you right now, you go around the world, you're going to see some people who might look like Neanderthals, but they're not. They have more Homo sapien bones in them, or DNA in them. So it's just trying to find the origins of this. And the best way that I can do it is just going back as far as I can. That's why I like to take pieces of information from everybody, because my argument is not that one thing is the facts. My argument is my facts come from where I learned it at. What I mean by that is, if I say this is facts, it's my facts that I've read this from here. So show me where your facts come from. And I say it like this, and I said this before, evidence can be shown any kind of way. And I say that because there are people right now in the prison system today that have had a lot of evidence that showed that they were guilty for a crime. But later on, 20, 30 years later, new evidence emerged, and that person wasn't guilty. So evidence is only as good as the time that we're using it, and how good we understand and comprehend that evidence.
Good point. Alexander, is there a haplogroup that it indicates that people do have a heritage from Atlantis?
Yes, there are theories about that, and they are often considered pseudoscientific races, but not only it's about haplogroups or genes, but also about their appearance. And that's why, they are ridiculed by the mainstream, is because the Nazis used, their vision of the famous Aryan race, of these high people with blonde hair and blue eyes. They were actually more of people with red hair, but also, very tall and blue eyes. So these theories are not considered, and are not taken very well. But yes, there are theories like that. They are connected with again, something that looks like out of Atlantis, just as, previously out of Africa theory about human origin, later times when it comes to not the origin of humans themselves, but later civilizations out of Atlantis, and you see similar genetic traits on the coasts of Africa, in places like the Azores, Canary Islands, then in places like Spain, Portugal, and on the other side of the world, in places like coast of North America, in the Atlantic coast of North America, and islands of the like Bahamas, Cuba, and stuff like that. So yes, there are things like that. I'm not very heavily into it, and it's a bit dangerous to tell about this stuff because it's bannable. So I won't go very deep into that, but I see that yes, there are some stuff because we see that people appeared actually on these coasts of the Atlantic, America, and on the coasts of Europe, Western Europe, and West Africa, Morocco, and the islands that I previously mentioned, just after the times of Atlantis, and after the ending of the last ice age. So it could be connected logically, but I don't know if it's true or not. But I know that Nazis searched for things like that, and it's the same like the magic, spirituality, and the occult throughout the centuries was considered forbidden by the elites, but at the same time the elites were using all of that. For instance, in the during the Elizabeth I's reign in the Great Britain, she used all the occult stuff, but everyone using it was considered heretic and killed immediately. So I always say from the conspiracy theory perspective, if some people are into conspiracies, there is something going on for sure.
Yeah, I think when David Brody was a guest, he I think he was covering his book Echoes of Atlantis. Yeah, he was talking a little bit about the coastlines of the Atlantic Ocean, and the Basque region has like that Rh negative blood. It's kind of concentrated in just a few locations, but the Basque region had one of the higher concentrations, and it's like, where'd that come from? So you just kind of have to wonder. Like David was posing, were they survivors of Atlantis as the nation was becoming submerged, and they floated to safety and ended up off the coast of Spain. But so there's a little bit more evidence. We don't have an abundance of evidence, but there's some. How do you explain a group of people who have such an unusual blood type? So it's really an interesting question, and we can get into they alien hybrids and things like that. It is a fascinating show, but how much of this information was documented in the books that were at the Library of Alexandria before
We don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, what do we know anything like what was there? Were
We know
both of
that
your
there.
books there? What what do we know?
Yeah, we did not know much exactly what was there. We know a bit of things, for instance, later Renaissance event texts considered to be inspired by some sources from the Library of Alexandria, and there are some estimates, and I don't remember the exact numbers of how much was there in the Library of Alexandria, but I think we do not know much. Maybe Tyrone knows something more, but I unfortunately don't.
No, I don't. I agree with you. It's really hard to get to that answer because of the simple fact that there's so many different theories and ideas, and we're only using the very small amount of information that we have. And then we also have to remember that people made mistakes back then, also, but because there are lack of people who understand the language or the writing systems or the ideas, it makes it harder. And even today, a lot of people don't take their sneakers off or boots off and put themselves in the sandals of the people that lived in those times. We can't understand it from our cultural beliefs and our way of living of today. We have to separate that and understand how they lived and how they did things back then.
Cool. So, what are both of you working on now? What are some new directions you're taking in your next writing projects? Oleg, do you want to start?
Okay, I will start. I went last year to the university here in Poland, in Gdańsk, and fortunately I was positively shocked. I was a little bit recognized and I was given personal study schedule, and I will be focusing on the ancient Middle East, including languages, texts, religions, and stuff like that. And right now I'm working on my first peer-reviewed article about the flood, connections between Mesopotamia, Bible, and stuff like that. So I'm digging into it, and in the meantime, I'm of course doing casual stuff about lost civilizations, tons of new stuff going on in prehistory and in archaeology, new findings, so everything connected.
Cool. And how about you, Tyrone?
For me, I'm actually starting my second book. It's actually going to be purely on the Anunnaki and the facts about it, what we know and what we are still trying to learn and what we don't know, right? And I also have two series on my YouTube channel, Rebirth of the Word 7099, where I go boots on ground to different places and do historical videos and stuff like that. It's not always ancient stuff like 3,000, 4,000 years ago. Some of it is like going back to, early 1600s, 1700s and stuff, American type history. My goal is to go to 50 states, all 50 states, and do something historical in all 50 states. And I'm also going to travel to Mexico and the pyramids and Peru and stuff like that throughout this timeline. And I also have another series that I'm going to continue to do because I think I get a lot of feedback of people that actually like this one, is that I have a series called What I've Learned from Reading This Book. So what I do is I take what I've read from this book and I point out what I've learned from it and what is actually correct and what's incorrect based off of my research only. All I want to do is just share people what I've learned. If I know something that somebody else doesn't know, I'm happy to share it. I know a lot of people get angry about that because everybody wants to feel like they're right. I don't care about being right because I would never be able to go to the past and see if I'm right or not. All I can do is just say, well, I'm right based off of what I've read. When somebody points something out to me that I'm incorrect on, I love to gather that information and update my knowledge on it. And one thing that I've always said and have said so many times is that I like when people correct me when I'm wrong, because that helps me remember what I said before, because I don't want to repeat the same thing that I said that was incorrect in the past. So if you point out something, you give me something with accurate information, and I can say, hey, yeah, this makes more sense. This actually brought in my understanding, gave me better knowledge. Then I would continue to use that from that point on. I would not go back to the misinformation like some people do. They'll continue to hold on to that misinformation because everybody, for some reason in this historical field, feels like they want to be the top dog in this. And we can't be, there's not one top dog. Everybody has to be willing to learn from each other, and your ego has to drop from that. And that's what I'm best at, is that I have no problem saying that I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I have no problem. Just give me the information to show that, so that way I don't take what I've learned or what I've researched and throw it in the trash just because you said something. I want to be able to throw it in the trash because you was accurate.
I think I I think a lot of what we're doing is more of a group effort than uh, individual achievements. And you know, you know, Tyrone, like you said, I wasn't there. Um, you weren't. None of us were there, but we're all dependent on each other to uh, just assemble a little bit of the pieces of the puzzle. I don't think anyone's ever going to figure out Atlanta, where it's actually located, who were the people, how many concentric rings, things like that. It's everyone's just needs to do their part. But I think both of you made some great points. Is there anything else? We're just a couple minutes after, about 65 minutes into the show. Is there anything else you want to plug, websites or anything? And then we wrap it up and let you get back to your afternoons.
I just want to say I highly recommend reading Alexander's book. His book is amazing. Is an intelligent individual. I appreciate you for having my book on hand, Alexander. But
I recommend both of our books.
I love.
I do too.
I love seeing people share their sources because it helps me on my journey. He has taught me a lot. He gave me a lot of information. We spoke a lot. And I think he's an awesome individual, and I think he's going to go very far in this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That's why I recommend both of our books. Mine is Deja Vu Has Surfing Already Been, and Tyrone's is Journeys Through the Origins of History. I also learned a lot from you, Tyrone. Really always enjoyed our conversations. We even have at least one that we haven't published because, of some stuff. So, yes, thank you. Thank you, Mark, for having us on the show.
Barbara and I thank you for letting us know. Hey, we would come back. We're going to cover some new stuff, and we're just glad to have this talk today. And we're gonna have to do another one of these sometime soon. The viewers really enjoy this topic a lot. That's what they keep telling us. Hopefully Tyrone and I can get together over the summer with his tour of mounds and stuff. There's some places I'd like to take him to as well. Make sure he gets the full effect. Maybe someday make it to Poland. That'd be pretty interesting. And I probably should have brought a book in from the other room, but show you some of the interesting Templar stuff that is in Poland that grabbed my attention as well. So we'll save that for another show. But I want to thank both of you for being such informative guests. We are going to do another show, covering more of this and going in other directions. It was really a lot of fun. Thank you, Barbara, for keeping us on the air, and we'll see everyone Thursday with a similarly themed show that was laying the foundation for Brad Olson on Thursday. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you sometime soon.